Welcome in to the newest episode of the Hoth Hangout podcast. Glad to have you with us, joining us for episode 57. Today, we are going to be talking about the bright side of Disney, a
Mhm.
very controversial, perhaps, topic within the greater Star Wars community nowadays. Joey and I figured, well, first of all, we have a fun episode in the works for not next week, but the following week. Joey and I will be ranking our favorite Disney live action shows. And so for this week and next week, we'll be doing our favorite and maybe not so favorite parts of Disney Star Wars. So it's going to be a fun one today. Looking forward to it very much. Before we get into all of that, remember you can always subscribe to the Hoth Hangout podcast on YouTube. Check us out there. Check out last week's episode if you haven't yet, the Star Wars Droid Draft that Joey and I did. We'll be covering some comments from that episode as well during today's episode. Additionally, you can check us out at our email, hothhangout@gmail.com. Shoot us any questions or thoughts you may have, Star Wars related or otherwise. You can also check out the Hoth Hangout podcast anywhere you get your podcasts, including Apple and Spotify. Leave a 5-star review on each of those platforms on the Hoth Hangout podcast. We would very much appreciate that as well. Additionally, we're at all the socials, whether it be TikTok, Instagram, or X, at Hoth Hangout on each of those. Joey, what's going on, man? How are you?
Doing well. We should also mention that at the release of this particular podcast, there'll be a special day here in the United States. It'll be Thanksgiving.
Very
So for
true.
all those listening on that Thursday, happy Thanksgiving to you and yours, and hope you have a wonderful holiday season.
Absolutely, yeah. Also part of the inspiration for Joey and I wanting to sort of take this approach to our synopsis, our analysis of the Star Wars sequels and the sort of more largely the Disney era of Star Wars.
Mhm.
We want to sort of cover this as an approach where let us preface it by saying I think oftentimes the approach to the sequel trilogy is I think it's fair to say a negative one amongst the average Star Wars fan. And so, what we thought would be a good approach to take is we are going to be doing, as I said, one episode covering our more favorite, the positive outlooks, the positive sides of the Disney Star Wars era. And then next week, of course, for those of you who are more inclined to perhaps not enjoy the sequel trilogy, we'll be doing an episode on some of the parts that we thought perhaps could have been better. So, um, buckle in, those of you who may not be fans of the sequel trilogy and just the Disney era. There is a lot to enjoy about it, I will say.
Mhm.
And Joey and I have sort of picked out and highlighted 5 of our favorite things, which we'll be covering today. And as I said, we're looking forward very much to talking about each one of those. A few of them in particular, I told Joey and Gibbo before, I was like, I'm gonna try not to ramble too much when we get to a particular topic, but before we get into any of that, a couple small pieces of news we had. Rosario Dawson shared some really cool behind the scenes Ahsoka photos. And I actually didn't see these until Joey shared them with us in our podcast production notes. And I saw them via the link that he shared. And for those of you who are audio listeners, it's essentially Rosario Dawson as Ahsoka. The first image, the first photo is with Ashley Eckstein, who, if you don't know, that's the voice of Ahsoka in the Clone Wars as well as in
Mhm.
Rebels. And then additionally, there's pictures of her with, and forgive me, I forget the
Is it
actress's name.
Ariana Greenblatt? Is that her
Yes,
name?
Ariana Greenblatt, and she also played young Gamora, I think, in Guardians of the Galaxy, if I'm not mistaken. Very
Mhm.
talented actress, and she played young Ahsoka in the Ahsoka show. And so there's another photo with Rosario and Ariana Greenblatt, and then there's that third Spider-Man like image,
Yeah.
the meme one. These are some pretty cool photos. Which also begs the question, Joey, favorite Ahsoka?
Ooh, do we have to do a tier list of that one? I
Tier list of
mean,
our Ahsoka
of
actresses.
our favorite the actresses? Oh,
No,
I
no, I'm
mean,
just like the favorite portrayal of Ahsoka is
oh,
what I'm trying to say.
I mean, I mean, I love Rosario, but I mean, Ashley, she
Yeah,
created the character. So if I had to choose, I would have to go with Ashley.
yeah, iconic, and it was a very sweet tribute in the comment of the post as well. It was really Rosario paying tribute to Ashley Eckstein and just the character of Ahsoka, and also paying tribute to Ariana Greenblatt. How
Mhm.
just amazing her performance! She really brought to life that early Clone Wars era Ahsoka character in the World Between Worlds episode of the new Ahsoka show. So that was pretty neat to see. Sort of just all the people we know to be Ahsoka coming together, and
Do you
uh,
think we get any more live action young Ahsoka?
ooh, you know, I am inclined to say no, to be honest with
Mhm.
you. And if we do, it'll be somewhat in the form, I think, of what we saw in the Ahsoka show, where it's like a flashback style thing. I don't think
Mhm.
we'll ever see like a young Ahsoka show.
Right, yeah.
As much as I love the character of Ahsoka, I think it is also a character that's been pretty fleshed out in
Yeah.
recent Star Wars, media and production and shows and movies, and so um, I would be surprised if we get a young Ahsoka show, but I wouldn't complain. I'll say that
Yeah,
too.
that's right.
So, yeah, but yeah, it would be pretty cool. And I imagine if they ever did do something like that, Ariana would be first on the list for playing the role.
Absolutely.
Perhaps we can look forward to that one day. Our other piece of news we wanted to touch on, and actually it somewhat relates to one of our 5 topics we'll be covering today for things that we most enjoy about the Disney era of Star Wars, is that the 3rd phase of the High Republic has officially begun. For those that don't know, the High Republic is sort of this literary side of the Star Wars universe, whether it be adult novels, junior novels, comic books, which one of them you and I covered in a recent episode of the podcast as well.
Mhm.
We'll link that episode down in the show notes below if anyone is interested in hearing our thoughts on the Star Wars High Republic comic book series that we read and covered. But for those that also don't know, the High Republic series was originally pitched as this three-phase sort of large thing, set of stories that's going to take place. And so the 3rd phase is officially underway. The first 2 phases, the first one was Light of the Jedi, which was in late 2021 to late 2022. The second phase was Quest of the Jedi, October 2022 through May of 2023. And then the 3rd phase, Trials of the Jedi, which just recently officially began, I guess, technically last week, right? With the
Mhm.
release of Eye of Darkness, which is one of the full novels, if I'm not mistaken, of the Star Wars High
Mhm.
Republic era. What are your thoughts on? And maybe this is a conversation we should table for one of our
Mhm.
topics we're talking about today. But what are your thoughts, just real briefly, on this set of news
I
pieces
mean
here?
well, I mean, from all that I've seen, especially with this cover for, the new book, The Eye of the Darkness, looks pretty ominous, not gonna lie. So I think it looks like, 'cause we know eventually what kind of happens with all the Jedi
Mhm.
but I don't know exactly what happens here with everything that has happened up until this point. I mean, there is a lot of books, a lot of comic books that both you and I do have to go through in order to be even slightly caught up to what's going on with the High Republic. But the fact that it's here and it's definitely a great addition to Star Wars from the literary side. I think it's gonna be something that we need to catch up to, Ben.
Yeah, I am admittedly like so. I mean, the comic book that we read, the High Republic comic we read was like the first time I'd really ever dipped my toe into that area of Star Wars fandom. And
Mhm.
it's something that I want to keep going back to, and something that I really enjoyed that we were able to do. And also perhaps begs the question: should we do another High Republic comic book series review?
Yes,
That might
please.
be yeah, that might be coming up here in the future pretty soon. But and also the last thing I want to say about just the 3rd phase of High Republic starting, now that we're sort of in a period of time where there's not a show coming out, there's not a movie coming out, with the conclusion of Ahsoka in the recent weeks, this is a great time if you're a Star Wars fan to, know, pick up one of these comic books, see what you think.
Mhm.
Not hashtag not sponsored. Joey and I are both
Yeah.
subscribers to the Marvel Unlimited, where we get
Yep.
access to all of these comic books whenever we like through the app, of course, with a monthly subscription fee. But um, check it out. If you're a Star Wars fan, highly, highly recommend. And lots to be excited about with this brand new novel by George Mann, The Eye of Darkness, which at the time of this recording has been out for about 5 days. So um, catch it at your local bookstores on the shelves, hopefully pretty soon. Might have to go over to Barnes& and Noble sometime and buy
Yeah.
myself like a Thanksgiving present or something like
I
that.
like it.
A couple pieces of comments and feedback we got from our last episode we wanted to feature before we get into our discussion of our favorite parts of the Disney Star Wars era. Are from three of our viewers who we love and appreciate. Three who tend to leave comments that we enjoy dissecting and breaking down here on the pod. The first of which is from Aunt Vasuvi. Aunt Vasuvi says, "Welcome back and many thanks to Ben, Joey, and Gibbo. I would categorize Grievous." This is, of course, in reference to our droid draft episode where I perhaps unfairly took General Grievous as my first
Mhm,
pick in the
mhm,
draft.
mhm,
Is he
mhm.
a droid? Is he not a droid? Who knows? Well, according to Amvasuvi says, "I would categorize Grievous as a cyborg, not a droid, but I'm glad you included him. All of your picks are respectable, but Joey's spoke more to my disposition, yet I love them all. I surely would love to see more BD3000 luxury droids in future projects." Iman Esfandi was wearing contact lenses, of course, in that photo you showed, in which the blue color was praised. Naturally, they are delicious chocolate hue. Since you asked, my favorite is the midwife droid from episode 3, which I was like, "Oh, wow, that's interesting."
That's a good
Uh,
one.
yeah, yeah. Also, by the way, I totally thought in last week's
Mhm.
episode when we looked at that image of Iman Esfandi that was his real eye color for a second.
Yeah, I did not realize that until Aunt Vasuvi mentioned it, that you had actually really thought that that was his eye color, and then you had mentioned also in a reply to her comment that you didn't realize that, so
Yes.
it is no, yeah, that is not his real eye color, but, good to know, good to know.
Yeah. Well, yeah, the BD3000, to be completely honest with you, I had to look it up. It is like it says during the Clone Wars, it was known as a hologram VJ hosted music program which broadcast across the galaxy. The show was popular among the Republic's clone troopers, sometimes dedicated songs to units such as the Mud Jumpers of the 224th. So, uh,
Interesting.
yeah, even used by Senator Padme Amidala. So, the BD3000 luxury droid. Nice call out there, Amasuvi. Love that one. Our second comment was from Lord Galvatron. Lord Galvatron says, "My personal favorite droid is and probably will be Chopper." After you picked Chopper, I was like, "Man,
Chopper's so good.
I really regret not having him on my list."
Would I get him at 2? Yeah, that's
Yeah,
a yeah,
yeah.
that's a good one.
Yeah. Lord Galvatron went on to say the fact that they were able to make an astromech droid so funny and cynical has canonically committed several war crimes and over 50,000 confirmed kills all at once will never be topped. I read this comment from Lord Galvatron and I was like, 50,000? I had to look up what the reference was and I was like, oh, yeah, I guess kind of.
Which one was it again?
Are you talking about the 50,000 part?
Where was the 50,000
Here's
from
just
again?
for the sake of me not butchering it, I'll read it off from the same exact thing
Okay.
that I read it from. So of course, this is spoilers for The Bad Batch if anyone has not seen The Bad Batch, so you've got about 5 seconds before I, start reading here. Alright, let me see if I can find it. Since The Bad Batch takes place nearly 3 decades before Rebels, okay, this is about Harrison Dula. For a detailed assessment of the little droid's kill count, he has been responsible for the death of over 50,000 characters in the Star Wars franchise.
Wow.
Chopper blows up a TIE fighter, so that's one. In the season premiere, he blew up more, so that's four. So these are like all kind of adding up a
Oh,
little bit.
wow.
Uh, let's see. Oh, here we go. So the biggest one is from all, it's 47,000 at once. He has also sabotaged the indicator, which is the name of a ship, causing it to explode and take two Imperial cruisers down with it. The indicator seemed roughly the same size as an Imperial I-class Star Destroyer. According to the wiki, those have over 37,000 crew members and in
Wow.
addition 9,700 stormtroopers, which makes just under 47,000. So, um,
Yeah,
Chopper is responsible for the deaths of perhaps 50,000 people.
that's crazy.
Yeah.
Good for him.
Yeah. Shout out to Lord Galvatron for that piece of that nugget of information, which I had to like actually look up and confirm whether it was true or not. Hey, and he's on your team, by the way. He's on
He's
your
on my
division.
team, yeah.
Yeah.
Listen, they got good numbers, that's all. You gotta get the guys that get the numbers.
Yeah. Our final comment we wanted to showcase today is from Spy on Sports. Spy on Sports listed out their favorite their top 5 droid picks, as well as a couple honorable mentions. In order, Spy on Sports list was K2SO, IG-88, BB-8, Imperial Viper probe droid, R0GR, and this is from Lego Freemaker. And
Roger,
this is a
Roger.
this is a deep cut here. Spy on Sports says. A couple honorable mentions that he also left was Hu Yang or LOM, IG-11, L337, and then Spy on Sports also says, "Imagine that! I picked a Rogue One character at the top of my list."
Yeah.
A notorious fan of the Rogue One film.
What a good that's a great list, though.
It is really good,
It
yeah.
spreads it spreads across a lot of the different shows and movies.
Yeah, yeah. Lots of love here for Rogue One and for Solo as
Empire
well.
as well.
Yeah, Empire,
Got
yeah,
Empire, yeah.
yeah. Well, some great picks there. Where was did we leave K2SO off of both of our lists last week?
No, no, I got K2 at 3.
Oh, did you really? Okay.
I got K2 at
Okay.
3 and then L3 at 4.
Okay, that's right. We left IG-11 off of our list
We left
last week.
IG-11. Yes, that's
Yes,
correct. And
that's right.
IG-88 if you wanna go
Right,
for both of those, yeah.
right. Well,
Great
we wanna
list.
yeah, great list there. We wanna thank each of you who left a comment and, provided feedback on last week's Droid Draft episode, and if you're watching this episode here today, leave us a comment for, what your thoughts are,
Eh,
what your favorite parts are of the Disney Star Wars era.
this might be different comments coming in.
Yeah, yeah. Hey, if you're thinking about leaving a negative one, that's fine, but we're gonna be
Yeah, yeah.
doing our not so favorite parts next week. So this week, our parts that we've enjoyed
Yeah,
about
yeah.
the Disney Star Wars era. Next week, some things we
Yeah,
think that could be a little bit better.
yeah.
So
So we might have like, duplicate, comments from each week, just,
yeah.
saying of,
There's gonna be
the
one
stuff
person
they don't
who's
like.
just like, I hated blah blah blah, and I hate, yeah. Anyways, so um, without further ado, as I mentioned before, we have 5 areas or 5 different things that we have selected as high points of the Disney Star Wars era. I don't know, Joey, do you want to introduce all 5 of them at the beginning, or just do them as we go? What do you think?
Let's go as we go. I
All
think that'll
right,
be alright.
all right. The so I guess the first one we want to talk about, and again, this might be contentious because there probably are some people that don't like this film, which is fair, but we want to say The Force Awakens is one of the 5 best things that Disney has done with Star Wars. And now, for some of you out there who may be thinking, "Oh, I hate the sequels," um, just hear us out for a second. The Force Awakens
Mhm,
was a film that was highly, highly, highly anticipated. This was the first Star Wars we had received in, gosh, I think at the time it would have been 10 years, right? Revenge of the
oh,
Sith was '05 and
mhm,
Force Awakens was 2015. Does that sound
mhm.
right?
Sounds about right, yeah.
So there was a lot of excitement about this movie. Um, lots of questions going into it as to what the story would actually be. We got tons of great new characters. I think people that tend to look down on some of the sequel trilogy characters, I think are largely basing those opinions on what eventually happened with the characters after episode 7. I think the introduction of these characters in the first sequel film is actually done pretty well. I think there's certain people that might have their qualms with the way they handled Rey's character in particular, but especially like Kylo, Finn, I think are 2 of my personal favorite inclusions in this film. And then we also got the additions of, the old school characters like Han and Leia
Mhm.
and I get and Chewbacca and Luke for the 1 minute that he was in this film or whatever it was, 20 seconds or something like that. But um I just think this is a pretty good movie overall.
Yeah.
It is a my one like small nitpick with it, which doesn't say anything as to the quality of the film because I think it's a good movie, is that it is really just a rehashed version of New Hope.
Mhm.
But I also think that's why so many people liked it after the
Right.
film, was that it was like, well, this is like something we're familiar with and something that we loved, and so in a different form, it's still something we love.
Mhm.
So that is my quick spiel about why Force Awakens is perhaps one of my favorite things that Disney has done. How did you feel about this movie, Joey?
When it came out, I was very excited. I really enjoyed it. I watched it a couple times at the theater. And you and I have had discussions about this as well. Going
Mhm.
out of watching this movie, we were pretty, we were excited to see what the rest of the sequel was going to, how it's going to turn out. Now, that's what next week's episode is for. But but the feeling that you got from this movie, it was very much Star Wars. You kind of touched on the cast. For me, it's a diverse cast, with
Mhm.
Ray at the helm, and you got Finn and Oscar Isaac. All just great characters, great actors, and the introduction to BB-8. Yet I don't know how they can keep bringing in droid after droid, and you just fall in love with them every time. They just can do that. There's some type of formula, and as you mentioned, of course, the legacy characters Han,
Mhm.
Leia, and Luke and Chewbacca. That's why it felt like Star Wars, because you saw all these familiar faces. The storyline was basically the same as what you saw in New Hope. It was just the Death Star, but only bigger, whatever. So, the so it, but yeah, it was very familiar. It felt like home. And to start off, that was kind of like the first thing that we saw from Disney, as far
Mhm.
as movies were concerned. And I thought it did great. I thought, I can still watch that movie now, and have a positive outlook, or I think I'll smile through it. There's some jokes in there that I enjoyed, and the actions there. It is very J.J. Abrams, though, I will say.
Yeah.
It was very, you got the lens flare. You got the usual, the fast moving cameras. So I think it was this era, it was this generation Star Wars, and at the time I enjoyed it, and like I said, even now I still enjoy it.
Yep. I would say this is for me personally, and maybe this is another point as to something else I liked about the sequel trilogy. It's a far more controversial point what I'm about to say than what I've previous said about the Force Awakens. I like Force Awakens. I actually like Last Jedi too, even though a lot of people don't. Um, and I go back and forth as to which one I actually like more between the two
Mhm,
of them. I think Force Awakens is the
mhm.
safer film, and it does a lot of
Right.
things well. I think The Last Jedi takes more risks, which is a part of the reason why I'm inclined to say that's my favorite
Mhm.
of the sequel trilogy sometimes.
Right.
Um, I think I'm getting too much into the negative, so maybe I should just kinda hold off, but I think the lack of cohesion with J.J. Abrams and Ryan
Yeah.
Johnson in terms of storylines, doesn't do Last Jedi many favors, so I think it's fair to say that the general population likes Force Awakens the most of these 3 sequel
Right.
films, and it is the highest rated of the 3 on Rotten Tomatoes. I'll also add that in there. Um, there was a lot of well, before I say my last point, impromptu trivia, Joey. Are you ready for this?
Oh, okay, I'll try.
Okay. Name in order the critic ratings of the 3 Star Wars sequels from best to worst.
The Critic?
Yeah,
Oh, I bet you I'm thinking it's Last Jedi, Force Awakens, and then, Rise of Skywalker.
you're pretty close.
Okay,
Last
wait, let me guess again, hold on.
yeah.
So I said Switch, Rise of Skywalker, and Force Awakens.
No,
Oh, no.
surprisingly.
Oh, okay.
So
What is it?
so it's The Force Awakens is the favorite amongst the
Okay, it is
critics,
favorite. It is
barely
Rise of
over
S
The
yeah.
Last Jedi.
Okay,
Force Awakens at 93, Last Jedi 91, Rise of Skywalker at 51.
okay.
But in terms
Interesting.
of do you wanna rank them in terms of audience rating too?
Audience? Okay,
Yeah.
audience, that has to be Force Awakens, Last Jedi. No, no. Oh gosh, Force Awakens, Rise of Skywalker, Last Jedi?
So you're pretty close. This is shocking to me. Did
Okay.
you know of the 3 sequel films, The Rise of Skywalker has the highest audience score?
No,
Yes.
really?
Yes, 86%, Force Awakens
Interesting.
85, Last Jedi 42.
Well, I knew Last Jedi for sure, but I am shocked that Rise of Skywalker
Right.
was above that. Interesting.
For the audience score, yeah, I didn't know that either, that was very surprising. Anyways, I just looked that up, and so I thought it'd be fun to kinda throw that in there as a piece of Star Wars trivia.
Nice.
The last thing I wanted to say about The Force Awakens, then we can move on to our second point, is that one of my I remember watching YouTube videos going home after the movie and, like, watching all these different theory videos and
Yeah,
just,
yep,
like,
yep.
like this new character of Snoke especially
You're
was
right. Yeah, yeah.
so interesting to me. I was like, who the heck is that guy? Where was he during the the Return of the Jedi era? Like, was he around with the Emperor? Does he know the
Mhm.
Emperor? Is this the Emperor? There were just all these questions about Snoke. Is he Plagueis? I know that was a pretty popular
Yep.
theory at the time in 2015, 2016. And so that was the mindset and the
Yeah.
mentality I left the film thinking, like,
Mhm.
"Dang, that was a pretty decent movie, I liked it, and I'm excited for what I am
Right.
going to see next."
It kickstarted Star Wars again
Yes.
as a cultural phenomenon in pop culture. So I think that it did its job from that sense.
Yeah, yeah. And left us with hopes for the rest of the trilogy, something that maybe we didn't quite have the same feeling of
Mhm.
after Episode 8 or Episode 9, so, all that to say, Force Awakens, one of the 5 best things that we think Disney has produced since their acquisition of Star Wars. Number 2 is also our I knew you were gonna be excited about this one. Number 2 is also something, is also film related. 2 of our 5 are centered around films that Disney has produced since the acquisition of Star Wars. Number 2 is Rogue One. And I would personally say that this is my favorite Disney Star Wars movie. I don't know if you would say the same or not. I think your
Yes.
ranking of Rogue One was higher than my ranking of Rogue One
Mhm.
in our rankings of all the movies, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think I had Rogue One at 3, if I'm not
Right.
mistaken.
And I think in terms of like all 11 of my films, I think I had it at 4 or 5. I can't remember. But right up there towards the top. And like I said, my favorite since Disney has acquired Star Wars. I think something that Rogue One does really well, and something that maybe the sequel trilogy struggles to do at sometimes, I think it is able to enrich the lore of Star Wars
Mhm.
without, um, without stepping on the toes of the lore or the world
Right.
too much, without breaking it. It is a story that we had always sort of known, but never got to see before. I know you noted that, in the I think it's the opening crawl of New Hope, we hear about these Bothan spies, and they've acquired these plans, and then, that takes us right into the scene and on Princess Leia's ship, Tantive 4, and so that's how the whole franchise opens up. And so we knew vaguely who these people were and how the plans got to Leia, but we had never seen it before. And that's
Mhm.
what this movie does. And to use the analogy that I use way too often, I think I use it with Revenge of the Sith sometimes, but I think it's maybe even a more apt analogy with this film. It is like the missing puzzle piece that you finally got to like
Right.
put in 'cause it
Right.
connects the prequels to the originals in a way that is, emotionally moving. You feel connected to characters who you only have 1 film with, which is a feat in and of itself. I would say Jyn Erso is probably a top 3, Disney era character for me. I would
Wow.
go not as far as to say that I enjoyed her, Felicity Jones' role in that film that
Mhm.
much. Andor you could argue he's right up there too. I think another thing this movie does really well is and if you've listened to our podcast for a while, you know this about me. I like in film and movies, especially Star Wars, when there's moral ambiguity to situations. These very gray characters. Like Cassian Andor is not really a good guy. And
Right,
so
right.
and he's not like a bad guy, but I think that's what draws me to him as a character is that he is willing to do what it takes and there's no easy line of good, bad, black and white. He operates within the gray, which I enjoy seeing in characters. And so,
Right.
um, also a small spoiler, the film doesn't have a happily ever after moment, which we
Right.
might expect to get with a lot of other Disney movies. Something that I also can appreciate as a film. And so, this movie just did so much. It explored more about the concept of the Force. It's not just something that Jedi and Sith use. It's like something
Mhm.
that is imbued in all living things within this universe. And Donnie Yen's character is a great example of kind of
Mhm.
the exploration of the Force in this movie. And maybe the my last point, and I know I've been rambling again. Uh, Without this movie, there is no mean, obviously, it came out after the originals, but without the events of this movie, there is no New Hope, there is no Empire, and there is no
Right.
Return of the Jedi. It just connects everything in a way that's really satisfying, and I like this movie a lot. All right.
Right.
What are your favorite parts about this movie? Because I know this is a huge
Yeah.
like, this is one of your favorite Star Wars movies.
Right. One of my favorite Star Wars, and this, unlike the how The Force Awakens very much felt like Star Wars, somehow this also felt like Star Wars without any of the elements that Force Awakens needed. You needed
Mhm,
the legacy characters, you needed, lightsabers, you needed, so there's a lot of those things that you needed to have Star Wars, something to feel like Star Wars, but Rogue One didn't necessarily have all of that. Now it had the Empire, it had the Rebels, that type of thing, but it didn't need, all these special effects. It did it with the casting, it did it with the writing, and why this movie will always, have a special place because of that. And again, kind of what I mentioned in the with the Force Awakens, widely diverse cast in this one.
mhm,
You had Chirrut and Baze, you had Andor, you had Bodhi Rook, you had again Jin Urso, and Morsaw Gerrera. You always could use Morsaw Gerrera, right? So just to see all of those characters, it was very much an ensemble type of cast where it wasn't just one person and then everyone following them. Everyone was on their journey, everyone, and it just so happened that they all met up at this exact point in time where they needed all of them to be together. So I and before that point, they weren't even friends, they didn't know each other or anything, but they all had that common goal was to be against the Empire. So to see that come into fruition in just one movie and for
mhm.
them to make such an impact because like you said, because of this, we would not have A New Hope. They would not have the plans to the Death Star. And oh, but by the way, okay, so I did forget maybe one scene with the lightsaber.
Yeah.
um,
That was the last thing in my notes that I didn't say yet.
let's go ahead and just say how incredibly awesome that scene was to because you knew Vader was around, but him to just basically be slicing through the rebellion the way he did. I saw so many videos, and I think I saw like an 8-bit cartoon version of it. It was just an incredible scene. I thought, like I said, it's one of my favorite Star Wars movies, and the just to have this, and I'll be honest, going into the movie, I didn't really have a ton of interest into it. I mean, I understand its role, but it was one of those things that I thought of that was like, do we really need something this? Do we need this story? Because when it came out in what was that, 2017? Is that right? 2017, I believe it came
I
out.
think this was between Force Awakens and
Mhm.
Last Jedi, so I think it would have been 16 if I'm
Maybe
not
16, yeah,
mistaken. Yeah.
2016, that sounds right, yes. So in 2016, I think they first, mentioned it either at the Star Wars Celebration or D23 the year before. When I saw the initial images, I didn't see any lightsabers, so I'm like, "I don't understand what this movie's gonna be about." And sure enough, when I watched it, I'm like, "Wow, this is an incredible movie that didn't even need any of that." So, that's why it is so highly regarded for me because it was able to continue to be Star Wars, but not have to, throw a bunch of lightsabers and the Force at me to do it.
Yeah. I'm glad you mentioned the Vader thing because that was the
Yeah.
one thing I left out, and, and this is a great example though of kind of the same thing we talked about before in that it felt like it enriched the lore, and
Yeah,
so
right.
it didn't do anything with Vader that felt, you know, like it reverted the character in any way. It made the character seem more, to be feared and more powerful without doing anything to the character
Mhm.
from the originals. Because, you see him in the originals, you're like, he's menacing, but then you see him in the prequels, you're like, what happened to his fighting skills? And
Right,
so
right.
what this scene does for me is it's like he never lost those. This like he
Yeah,
had
yeah,
them the whole time. It's just,
yeah.
a product of the time when the movies were made where the acrobatic skills of the combat wasn't quite what it was in the prequel trilogy. But anyways, just Rogue One, a fantastic film. And while we're on this, we're not going to talk too much about it, but I actually like Solo too. I know a lot of
Yeah.
people aren't the biggest fans. I was pretty disappointed when they abandoned the Star Wars story model, doing films sort of
Yeah.
every other year, and 'cause I loved Rogue One, and I liked Solo a lot too.
Yeah.
So I think they're both Rogue One is surely my favorite of the 2, but I they're both great films and I think worth watching, and so was sad
Do
to
we
see
do
this model
we
go.
should do a rewatch of Solo and react to it.
Oh, I'd be down for that because 'cause I've only seen Solo, I think, twice or 3 times, but,
Okay.
anyways, worth doing. Stay tuned for the podcast in the future. So Rogue One, our second of our 5 things. Again, Force Awakens was the first. Our third is going to, just largely be live action Star Wars television. Now, this is something that obviously we had never thought to really be maybe possible, but not necessarily the model for what Star Wars should be, uh, prior to the acquisition of Star Wars by Disney, and really after the acquisition. Like, it was pretty quickly thereafter where it was made known, okay, we're going to have another trilogy of films. Like, that's what Star Wars is. Star Wars is
Yeah.
movies. Other than, of course, the animated, the animated Clone Wars and other animated products we had received. We had never received anything live action. It really didn't even feel like it was on the table very much until after Rise of
Mm.
Skywalker, when it was like maybe we need to reassess how we're going about Star Wars. And so up to this point, we've had 5 different live action shows, including Obi-Wan, Ahsoka, Book of Boba Fett, Andor, and The Mandalorian. The 6th show, Skeleton Crew, is on the way, and I believe is slated to be released at the end of January of next year,
Mm.
at least according to reports in terms of when the copyrights were filed for. Um, but we're gonna focus on those other 5 that we've seen up to this point. And well, maybe also an opportunity to give a small teaser that not next week, because next week we'll be doing our not so favorite parts of Disney Star Wars, but the following week we're going to be ranking some of those live action shows and
Yeah.
Disney products of Star Wars. So, um, but the live action Star Wars TV shows have brought a new perspective to Star Wars. I think it allows the world, and you and I have talked about this before, it allows the world to be built in a way that films haven't before. I think, ironically, the animated Clone Wars is a good example of how you can world build based on the longevity of the show, because it's in a different medium of a like a long film. You're doing it in shorter episode increments, which totals out to longer runtime, and so allows you the opportunity to character build a little bit better, world build a little bit better, and get to know the characters in a way that maybe a film wouldn't. And so, um, without going too much into which of these were our favorites, because definitely there's ones that you and I have enjoyed more than others. I would just largely say that Star Wars in live action TV is a fresh medium for Star Wars. While
Right.
some shows are perhaps a little bit better than others, I think I am a fan of this style of Star Wars, which is ironic because if you were to ask me 5 years ago, I would have said, "I really wish they would just stick to movies." And I
Mhm.
don't feel that way at all now. I'm actually a pretty big fan of most of these TV shows, and so, that's kind of what I have to say on the live action Star Wars. Um, that model for just Star Wars in general. How did you feel about the approach to the live action shows?
I think it was a really good way to, as you said, world build. I think the best way to world build in any universe or anything like that is through books because you have just so much space to be able to do it. But I think secondly would be TV shows. Especially you
Mhm.
have these 8, 10, 12 episode seasons that you're able to really flesh out particular characters or particular storylines, what have you. And it just makes it for, it introduces so much more lore like you said. So it was really cool seeing it, and Mandalorian being the first of it, and we won't go into so much detail, but it was really something that I had not expected at all. Um, I was at the Star Wars Celebration when they did show a little bit of footage from the Mandalorian, the first episode, and it was really cool to watch. But even still, I was like, how is this gonna, you know, uh, makes sense as far as Star Wars. Just like you, I was like, I want Star Wars movies. That's just what I'm used to, you know. But they had this kind of in their back pocket, and they were able to come through on that. I mean, it was pretty amazing. Um, and I was a very late adopter of the Clone Wars series, for instance. So I was the same way. I'm like, I don't know how this is going to add to anything that I like about Star Wars, but then they came through on that. So I should have just shut up and just watched these shows and just been happy with them. But I mean, the ones that we mentioned, Mandor and especially Andor, something that I wasn't really expecting to enjoy as much as we did. It gives me more hope for Star Wars, as
Mhm.
they continue to churn out these types of shows.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and they also were able to bring, I talked about Clone Wars. They were able to bring these animated characters to the live action, which is crazy. Like people like Ahsoka and the Grand Inquisitor, the Rebels crew, and so we just have a place for that now.
Mhm.
And we always talk about go back and watch Rebels, go back and watch Clone Wars, because it gives you so much more depth into these characters when you do see them in live action. This isn't just a random Mandalorian named Sabine. Who knows who this person is? No, she's got a whole story already in Rebels that we know about. So, uh, yeah, I did not know that I wanted live action TV in my Star Wars, but now I can't see a future without it.
Yeah, that's a great way of putting it. I like that a lot. And you
Yeah,
mentioned Andor. Just I wanted to briefly touch on that. You and I loved that show.
right.
There's a lot of people that weren't big fans. They thought it was a little slow. I just
I mean,
I
I agree with that to some extent, but for you need to power through it.
Yeah, and for what it's worth, I think not every Star Wars show has to be Ahsoka or The Mandalorian,
Right.
where it's like every episode feels like there has to be something big or important that happens. I think it's okay. I think it's actually good for us as Star Wars fans, and just if you're a fan of TV in general, watching shows, there's going to be some episodes that aren't intended to be super exciting. And that's okay because like good shows are made through character building and don't have to be about some crazy action scene that happens in the episode. So I think that's what Andor does really well, and why and not to tease too much of where I would rank it in my Disney
Mhm.
stuff, but it's amongst my probably
Yeah.
I would say 2 or 3 favorite Disney shows that they've made. Anyways, not to go too much into Andor, but I just thought it's worth mentioning because a lot of people tend to kinda bag on that one, which is one that you and I have enjoyed,
Right.
so
I mean,
we're
to me, that is the Rogue One of the TV series. It didn't need a
yeah,
lot of,
yeah, exactly.
yeah, and well, obviously, it had an actual character from Rogue One, so I guess
Sure,
there's no
yeah.
surprise there, but yeah, it's the Star Wars that doesn't have Star Wars stuff in it.
Yes, yeah. And then the last point, I think you mentioned this, but in case we hadn't mentioned it yet, a lot of these also do a really good job of filling in stories, not
Mhm,
just Andor or Obi-Wan, um, but filling in stories between movies and other shows and storylines that give the character more substance and more depth and more meaning, as it relates to the other shows and as it relates to the future of those characters in
mhm,
future Star Wars installments. So um, just the model of live action Star Wars, while some might be critical of it, I've personally enjoyed it, and I think it's fair to say that it's probably what they're gonna be sticking to for some time, and maybe in addition to movies, because we know we're getting 3 new films in the coming
yeah,
years as well, so an exciting time to be a Star Wars fan, as you and I always say. The 4th of our 5 things that we, are excited or about Disney Star Wars, our favorite parts of the Disney Star Wars era, is we've kind of lumped together Rebels and the 7th season of Clone Wars into one thing, because they sort of go hand in hand, and I would even also perhaps even throw Bad Batch in there as well as we could. Um, this is a portion of Star Wars which I think maybe some people would have an aversion to because it's animated. Um, and I just think as a Star Wars fan, if you enjoy great stories, if you enjoy great characters, I don't see how the Clone Wars is something that you could just, like, skip over. Um,
Right. Yeah.
as I mentioned, the depth of the characters in this show, are so good. Um, I think for anyone who is, especially if you fall in this category of people, if you've seen the prequels and not seen Clone Wars, I think it's a disservice to the characters in the prequels, because
Mhm.
Clone Wars, especially Clone Wars season 7, but all of the show, really elevates a lot of the meaning behind those characters and ties you to them in ways that a 2.5-hour film can't.
Right.
And so that's the first thing I would say. The Clone Wars is also this beautifully done show. The 7th season in particular, um, for those that don't know, and this really isn't a spoiler, it runs congruently to the events of Revenge of the Sith, Episode 3. And so what you're seeing in the Clone Wars show, the 7th season, is essentially the perspective of Ahsoka as Anakin is, going through the
Right.
events of Revenge of the Sith. And so it's very uniquely done. It's very nuanced. There's an amazing lightsaber battle if
Yes.
you're a lightsaber battle person. It's actually, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think it's the only lightsaber battle in animation in Star Wars that is mocapped
Yeah, I
animation.
believe that's correct. Yes.
Right, and so they take the actors and then they put, the little dots on them if you're not familiar with
Mhm.
what mocap is, and then they track their
It was a
movements.
video game.
Yeah,
It was
essentially,
a
yeah,
video it was
yeah.
a video game,
It's
and it
amazing.
looked incredible, and also, they had the events of Order 66 happen,
Yep,
in this world as well. So
yep.
you see Ahsoka coming to the realization what's going on. The Clone War, all the clones kind of turning on her and everything like that. To see all of that happen in this season was just crazy. So to have Disney put this out was just amazing.
This was one of the best surprises we've received in the last couple years of Star Wars fandom.
Mhm.
Like, when they announced this, I remember being so happy that we were going to
Mhm.
get this, and also a little bit confused because I wasn't sure how they were gonna do it. And then when they announced that it was, like, as Order 66 was happening, I was like, "Oh, wow. That's okay. I kinda get it,
Yes.
but it'll be interesting to see how they do it," and, they really knock it out of the park. I think the 7th season of Clone Wars is
Yes.
fantastic. Did you have any more Clone Wars thoughts before we kinda dive into some Rebels stuff here?
No, let's do some Rebels.
Okay. I think the ghost of or the crew of Rebels on the Ghost is, um, super endearing, and there are aspects of Rebels which feel more akin to perhaps a children's show maybe than the Clone Wars does, and
Right.
then you watch Rebels and you're like, "There are some really deep themes and meanings in this show, um, which are not really meant for, like, an eight-year-old to watch."
Right, yes.
And
Yeah, 'cause
so
and I think we said, like, it starts really kinda almost silly where you just, you have this kid Ezra and, they're got this crew that is just kinda doing these random things across the universe for the rebels, but then it gets real deep real fast. So,
mhm,
I think for this to be on I think it was on Disney XD, which I think is really
yeah,
marketed towards a younger crowd for sure.
right,
Um, and I think the only thing that, markets towards the young crowd is really, like, the animation style that's used.
yeah,
It's very much, it's very much what is that? I don't even know, like, what you would call that animation style, but either way, they made it really seem like this is just a kids show with, it's gonna have fun. This was the Young Jedi Adventures of the era, I think, that it was supposed to be, but, we ended up getting some really good storylines, really heartful moments, within only 4 seasons of the series.
mhm. And now to relate this back to our last point about live action Star Wars, now we're seeing these characters from Rebels take shape and take form in live action, and so
Mhm,
that adds to the depth of the character, obviously, but you really get a sense of who these characters are in this
mhm.
show. If you are someone who also falls into the camp of you've seen Ahsoka, but you haven't seen Rebels, I got to tell you, you will. immensely understand the characters better, of Sabine and Ezra and Hera in particular, if you give yourself the opportunity to watch Rebels. It can feel a little campy, a little silly at first, and especially in the later seasons, you realize that this show is about so much more than just being like a children's fun Star Wars show. They're really exploring the relationship between Kanan and Ezra, and more largely, it's Dave Filoni's uh, kind of message as to what the Force is.
Mm,
My favorite episode, if I could say, of this show is the episode with the Bendu,
mhm,
where the Bendu is talking to Ezra, and he's like, or maybe it's Kanan, um, but the Bendu is this like mystical character that's neither good nor bad, but is almost just the essence of the Force, and it is just a profound episode because it's really taking what we know about the Force and shifting it and altering it in a way that, it feels really intriguing and interesting, and, so that is an episode I would point to say, check that out if you haven't before,
right.
and then also to something I've already said, it's just a fun show.
Yeah.
Kanan, Hera, Zeb, Sabine, Ezra, and Chopper, they make a
The
pretty good fun
war
crew.
criminal.
Yeah, the war criminal Chopper. This along with Clone Wars are just so foundational to not just the shows and not Star Wars, but the future of Star Wars. As we've seen with Ahsoka, they're taking these characters and they're just running with them, and they're doing it in a really cool way. So, um, Rebels and Clone Wars season 7 and Bad Batch, not to leave that one out too. I'm super
Mhm.
excited for the next season of that.
Right.
Um,
And
yeah.
that's an example of something that I wasn't even sure I really wanted as well. I mean,
Mhm.
I like clones, but to have an entire series based off of just them, I remember some of the slower episodes for the Clone Wars series were kind of the clone based ones for me, So the ones with fives and Echo, and so I because I really wanted to get back to Anakin and Ahsoka, see what they were doing. So going into this, I wasn't quite sure how much I would have enjoyed it, but I mean, this one pulls at the heartstrings too, when you exactly at the moment that you don't think it will. So I think the addition of Omega into this cast was a smart move, and it's somebody that you really want to root for, and I think that's the big thing. You want somebody to root for, and
Yeah.
I ended up really rooting for the for Clone Force 99.
You wanna hear my hot take about the Bad Batch?
Okay.
This is the deepest Star Wars show
Oh, okay.
because the whole show is answering the question, what does it mean to be a human? Or what does it
Right,
mean to
right,
be a
yeah.
person? Like, that is in essence what this show is doing.
Right,
And
right.
so, like, again, is this a children's show? I would say no.
No, 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 no,
But
no.
yeah, they go some pretty deep themes in these animated shows, whether it be Bad Batch,
Yeah.
Rebels, or Clone Wars. So, all great things that I would say Disney has done. I would probably say my favorite thing are Clone Wars season 7, Rebels, and Bad Batch.
Mhm.
I really, really, really like the depth that these add to Star Wars, and I love the
Yes.
characters in each of these. So,
Right.
um, yeah. Do you have a favorite of those 3, by the way, before we move on to our 5th and final thing?
What? Of what?
Of
Clone Wars
of
Season
those 3
7,
shows, yeah, Clone Wars
Clone
season
Wars Season
7,
7, Bad Batch, and,
Bad Batch, and
I gotta say
Rebels.
Rebels for me. I think
Yeah.
Rebels for me. I mean, I really like Clone Wars Season 7, but, uh, the Rebels brought in a whole set of characters, I think, that I just absolutely fell in love with.
Yeah, yeah. I think if we were just doing the 7th season of Clone Wars, Rebels, and Bad Batch, I would probably say the same thing.
Yeah.
Now, if we were including all of Clone Wars, I don't know. I might
Nah,
have
that's a
to.
different thing.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's 4 of our 5 things we love about the Disney era of Star Wars. The 5th and final thing that we wanna touch on is actually kind of related to something we talked about. We mentioned, the literary depth of Star Wars, and so this 5th thing is very focused on that, and it is the High Republic era of Star Wars. We mentioned this also in the news section of today's podcast at the beginning, if you'll remember that part. But High Republic is an era which, up until, gosh, 3 years ago, was very largely unexplored. as an era within Star Wars. If you're not familiar with what the High Republic is, it comes prior to the prequel era. This is the time when there was a lot of peace within the galaxy. Well, as you'll see, the High Republic era calls that into contention as there's kind of the rumblings of the beginning of a lack of peace. And so um, this High Republic era is something that has been incorporated slowly over time, whether it be novels, whether it be junior novels, comic books, short stories. There's been so many different ways that they've added um, lots to this universe. And I think you also mentioned it, Joey, that the one way in which you can add depth to a universe, even better than TV, is by books. And that's what you see here with the High Republic era.
Mhm.
I would not be shocked if we're sitting here 10, 15 years from now and we have like a trilogy of High Republic movies that are based off of these novels and comic books which have come out in the last 2 years or so.
Here's hoping.
There's lots to take from these.
Yeah.
What is your thoughts on the High Republic era?
I think it really pushes and it pushes the fan base to reading, which I think is incredible. For first and foremost, I think that's because you think of fandoms like Harry Potter, for instance. They
Mhm.
started with the books, and then they made the movies. You think of like Lord of the Rings, same thing. Um, so here is a chance for Star Wars to do it as well,
That's
where you have
such a
this
good
entire
point.
era.
That is
Yeah,
such a good point.
there's you have this entire era, and that you have to define. Why not start from the beginning? Here's your huge universe and all the things that that are included in it. And then when we make the movies, we can mess them up because that's what normally the book readers are. They're
Right.
like, oh, Dobie wasn't supposed to do that. So I think to have that in Star Wars is just going to be really cool. So to your point, if we can have movies on the High Republic just like this, you're gonna have so much source to pull from. I mean, it's been what, 4 years or something like that, 3, 4 years of book after comic book after, YA novel. Um, it's just this huge universe, this huge era that we are just now learning about. I mean, I liken it to, like, what expanded universe probably is to Star Wars because there's that built a whole universe, a side universe in itself only to get axed completely by Disney. So maybe we
Mhm.
talk about that next week. But just to see to have the ability that to build everything from the ground up in the way of books, I think is a great way to tell this story. And the way they're doing it, they have all these authors talking to each other. They know what the story is for each of these. Unlike something like and again, maybe a next week type of topic, unlike the sequel trilogy, kind of what you mentioned earlier. So to have all the authors, kind of in on all the storylines to understand what, this character is gonna do from this book to the next book, onto the next storyline, I think, is probably one of the more exciting things about this era, about Star Wars, and, really the fans, really could get behind.
Yeah. Which also is perhaps a good segue into kind of what we're gonna be talking about next week. You
Mhm,
mentioned that my perception of this is that the authors for these novels, young adult novels, junior novels, and comic books, that all are taking place within the High Republic era, they seem to have such a great appreciation and understanding for the direction that these works should take, in regards to the direction of the characters, the plot of the story, just kind of the focus of all of it. It
right.
feels cohesive and it makes sense and it feels well planned out. My question is why that same approach wasn't taken with some of the Disney era movies. I see that so much from the High Republic stuff. Like I whenever I read these articles, I'm like, man, they've really got this planned out. You see the progression of how these characters are gonna,
Mhm.
how it maps out, the stories. I just
Yeah, I mean, they had phases.
yeah,
They had
yeah,
phases, that had waves. They had all of this lined up for years. Yeah, you would hope that, your movies would do something similar, but the fact that they're getting it right at all at this point, I'm happy. I'll take that as a win.
yes.
And
And
hopefully
last
and hopefully and hopefully that carries over to the visual side.
absolutely. Well, that was the last thing I wanted to say was I loved the point you made. I think we're a little bit spoiled as Star Wars fans. I loved the point you made about
We Just a little bit.
Harry Potter and Lord of the Rings. Because for the probably a pretty good portion of those fan bases, um, you read the books and it's like, "Oh, they're making a movie about the thing I read." Whether it was Harry Potter or Lord of the Rings. Star Wars doesn't really have that. It was just like direct to movie with the original and prequels before there was really any. Well, I shouldn't say before there was any. There was lots of books that came out about the original trilogy before the prequel trilogy ever came out. But those books didn't necessarily inspire films directly like Harry Potter and Lord of the Rings did. And so I think we're a little bit spoiled as Star Wars fans because we we kind of just expect our movies and our TV shows to be amazing. And, you
Mhm.
know, I think to an extent there is pressure that comes with basing a film off of a book, but at the same time, the reason the book is great and the reason the movie is being made is because the book is great. And so with film, it's a little bit different because you don't have that to base it off of. Of course, when you have someone like with the mind of George Lucas, it's like kind of easy for that naturally great film to just sort of develop. Um, and at this point, I'm rambling, but I just think I loved that point you made about we don't have books to base our films off of,
Mhm.
and now, we've had books for a long time, but to what level of inspiration they've
Right.
taken,
It was
hard to
the book
exactly say.
the books were to complement the movies.
Exactly.
They
Yes.
were never the reason to make a film, to make a show.
Right.
So you'll have something like, I don't know, Solo come out, and then there's, like, books about Solo and Lando adventures and
Yeah.
Kira and all this stuff.
Kira.
So,
Yeah.
yeah, so there was never something that was made for, because of a book, but it was all the books were made, just to fill in gaps here and there, make a little
Yeah.
bit of money for the movies.
Right. And rather than like these High Republic things being made to complement a film or show, it now
Mhm.
feels like something is being made that we can make film and shows out of,
Right,
which is an exciting thing because I think it's kind of the first time that that's really it feels like a possibility in Star Wars. Um,
right.
as you've said, most of the stories up to this point are just kind of complementary to the pre-existing movies or shows. So, again, High Republic movie in the future.
Please, trilogy, let's go.
I sure a High Republic trilogy would be so fun. I would love that.
I would love to see Avar Kriss
Yes,
and, oh my gosh, in live action, that would be great.
it would. The beacon, the destruction of
The
the
Beacon,
beacon.
yeah, yep, mhm.
Yeah. Well, these were the 5 things that we think Disney has done pretty well or great since the acquisition of Star Wars. Again, we're gonna be touching on some of the more negative things next week, but we
We'll
want
call
to
them
pose
criticism we'll call them criticisms.
criticisms, yes, because, things could always perhaps be a little bit better, but, so next week we'll be touching on our 5 criticisms. We hope you've enjoyed this one, and we want to pose a question to you after this episode. Comment down below what your thoughts are. What has Disney done right is our question of the week this week. What has Disney done right, or perhaps what is your favorite thing that Disney has produced during their, era of Star Wars as it was? So let us know down in the comments. And in regards to that, I would briefly mention once again that not this week, or excuse me, not next week, when we'll be doing our criticisms of the Disney Star Wars era, but the following week we will be doing our own rankings of the Disney live action TV shows, just as a reminder. So, yes, again on next week's episode, Disney Star Wars criticisms. Hope you can make it for that one. Joey, any last thoughts on the more positive outlooks of the Disney Star Wars era before we sign off for this episode?
I mean, I'm just gonna say thanks, Disney, for the things that you've brought to Star Wars.
Yes.
So this week, I say thank you. Thank you for the live action. Thank you for these animated series, and hope you have happy Thanksgiving.
Yes. The reason I chuckled is because last week when we were kind of tossing around how we were going to promo this thing, the way we decided upon it was this episode is thanks Disney, and then next episode is thanks Disney. But yes, thank you for to Disney for some of our more favorite parts of Star Wars in the past few years. Again, the Disney era is not something that is to be looked down upon or trashed in a way that takes away from some of the great things that they've also done in this time period. And again, not to say that there aren't criticisms because we're going to be talking about those next week. So if you enjoyed this one, hope you can join us again next week for our Disney Star Wars criticisms. Additionally, if you are not yet subscribed to the Hoth Hangout YouTube channel, check us out there for the video version of the podcast, as well as our reactions of Star Wars shows as those are coming out. Hit that like and subscribe button. We would very much appreciate it. Additionally, you can always email us your Star Wars thoughts or questions at hothhangout@gmail.com. Shoot us a question or thought there, and we'd love to feature it and showcase it here on the podcast as well. If you're an audio podcast listener, you can catch the Hoth Hangout podcast anywhere you get your pods, including Spotify and Apple. Leave a 5-star review on those platforms on the Hoth Hangout podcast. We would very much appreciate that. And thank you for doing so in advance. We love y'all for doing so. You can catch us on the socials, at Hoth Hangout, whether it be Instagram, TikTok, or X. Check us out on the socials. Again, that's at Hoth Hangout on each of those. We want to also thank Gibbo for producing today's show, the video, the assets, and who is the real best thing that came out of Disney Star Wars. Joey, was that in reference to Gibbo?
Yes, that's right. Gibbo is actually the best thing that's come out of Disney Star Wars. So thank you, Dave Filoni, for Gibbo.
Yes, very much. Gibbo, you got any thoughts on Disney Star Wars before we sign off?
We'll save it for next week.
Okay. Sounds good. Sounds good. Shout out to George Lucas. Shout out to Dave Filoni. Shout out to the Disney Star Wars era and the things that we loved during it. Thank you for listening to episode 57 of the Hoth Hangout podcast. Catch us next week for episode 58, covering the criticisms of the Disney Star Wars era. And until next week's episode, thank you so much for listening to this one. We appreciate you so very much. And until next time, may the Force be with you.